The Labour Relations Act doesn't need tinkering. It needs radical reform. There's a dire need to reinvigorate enterprise-level collective bargaining and enterprise-level engagement. Organisational rights needs to be radically reformed to make them properly democratic.
One of the biggest problems that we obviously face as labour lawyers is the resort to violence that we're now seeing as almost a norm in industrial action. I mean, we as labour lawyers, it's a one issue that we're forced to deal with in every single strike. It's either picket line violence or violence that manifests elsewhere. Now, it seems to me that a lot of it pertains to market conditions, is that we've got an excess of unskilled employees. Literally in every single strike action, an employer can resort to getting replacement labour to work, and the end result, of course, then is that workers have to resort to violence to persuade the scab labourers not to work, which is inevitably what we're seeing. The real question is whether the current bargaining system can ever kind of release us from that cycle of violence, whether there's anything that can be done, or whether the only resort will be to change the bargaining structure entirely and have either state-imposed minimum wages, where the state now intervenes and says, I'm going to set the wage, or alternatively move towards a centralised bargaining system where you have an arbitrated outcome and not a power outcome, which obviously would affect the way the economy operates.
We're getting to strike action very, very early before any sensible engagement has taken place.
There is violence in other countries on the picket line and the like, but it doesn't remotely equate to what we see, even in the worst examples in the rest of the world. Deep underlying cause, I'm going to suggest, of a lot of our violence is the absence of proper democracy, and that a lot of the strikes are taking place motivated by minority groups who are trying to force their will on the majority. The role of a strike in a social democracy is passive resistance, passive removal of labour in order to put pressure on the employer. But workers are being stoked up and encouraged to believe that they are fighting, which is my other point, a class enemy, that we are at war against employers. And that idea is being fostered by government, it's being fostered by union leadership, and it's not possible to have effective collective bargaining in a social democracy where there is a perception that the other side of the table is illegitimate.
Is the answer not to then to go back towards centralisation so that everyone bargains together and you don't have this ratcheting effect?
If you do that, you are going to so retard this economy, or retard it even more than it is retarded at the moment, because what that means is that if you get an enlightened employer who, by addressing a lot of the underlying causes that I've identified, and is able to greatly improve productivity, and we just made mention that our unit labour cost is amongst the highest in the world. We have amongst the most unproductive workers in the world. But now if an employer is able to manage that effectively and then wants to reward their workers for participating in that, they are prohibited from doing that, and they are held to the lowest common denominator. That's what's actually happening. Personally, what I think we should do here is to have, and this may sound radical, we should have a national minimum wage fixed by economists who know how much damage or lack it will do. I would be inclined to collapse the whole centralised bargaining system, but if not, have fixed sectors with minimum wages fixed there either by collective bargaining or by expert economists or overseen by expert economists, but an absolute rule that you may only fix minima at centralised level, and then you establish a duty to bargain at enterprise level, and you allow the market to play itself out, and you deal with worker concerns where they are arising, and you allow enlightened employers to reward better than than others. That's a very simplistic answer to it. And I may tell you that this was something that we've all been fighting for going back to the 80s. And in fact, I was looking up last night at COSATU's collective bargaining policy that it adopted in '94 was exactly that. They wanted a national minimum wage. They wanted designated sectors, industrial sectors, to negotiate minima, and that was their requirement. and then a duty to bargain at enterprise level to fix actuals. But we didn't get that in the LRA.
If you're going to have collaborative, cooperative, trusting relationships, they need to manifest themselves and take place at a workplace level. And I think that the over-focus on industrial bargaining, industry level bargaining, and the bureaucratization of trade unions, I'm convinced it must have played a role, if not a very large role, in the attitude of workers right now to unionization.
And I note that the AMPLATS workers are saying that despite being dismissed, they're not dismissed, and they've effectively reinstated themselves.
The resort to unprotected strikes is actually a gift to many employers at the moment, because they are able to mass dismiss the workforce, reduce the workforce, which they were wanting to do for various reasons, but it would have cost them a lot in retrenchment pay and process. Employer reduced workforce on sanitized terms and conditions. It's just a tragedy to watch what is going on here, because there's going to be masses of dismissal and there's going to be huge job loss, and the workers are going to come back having lost accrued benefits and so on, which is a huge benefit to employers. They just say, well, fine, that's it, we just cancel all that accrued stuff, we take you back as new employees. It's an absolute disaster. There are wonderful lessons in other countries. We can borrow from the experience of the rest of the world. We need to democratize industrial relations. We need to allow for competing unions to compete firstly to compete primarily for the status of the sole and exclusive bargaining agent of all employees in an appropriate bargaining unit. So even in an enterprise, you wouldn't have centralized bargaining with one union negotiating for everybody in the workplace. You might have two bargaining units, one of the more skilled workers or whatever, and another of other communities of interest. And those unions compete to win 50% plus one of the workers, whereupon, for a fixed period of time, they are the sole negotiator on behalf of those workers. But at the core of that is that you allow unions access, and secondly, you have an institutionalized method of testing support. Now, we don't have that, and in fact, we specifically did away with it in '95. It comes back to the point I made, we need to radically reform the LRA. We need to virtually start again if we're going to get ourselves out of this downward spiral.